We live in a world where there is more access to information than ever before. Generations, young and old, are being exposed to radically different ideologies and opinions every day. It can be so overwhelming trying to decipher what's true and what's false. But there is a way. Join me as we discuss some of the toughest questions out there about Christianity, the Bible, and culture. I'm your host, Nick Lackey. Welcome to The Garrison. Welcome everybody to another episode of The Garrison. I'm super excited because today I have my good friend Dave Mann with us, and we're going to be talking about Christianity among the youth and young adults in New Zealand. And so, Dave, would you like to quickly introduce yourself, tell people who you are and what you do?
Hey, kia ora, Nick. Yeah, so I'm married to Heather. We've got 4 boys. We live in Tauranga. I hail from a town called Hawara in South Taranaki, and that's still somewhat our home, given that both my wife and my parents live there, and we've both got siblings still in that more rural community. From about age 11, met the Lord. My mum changed. I knew I needed what she had, and from age 14, never desired to do anything really except to be in Christian work, to try to help Christian messages make sense to non-church people. So 30 years of ministry work behind me, and my particular, I guess, gifting area is in strategy and probably creative communication. So I produce video series, I do radio series, I speak a lot of places. I'm behind the Hope Project, these public media efforts, trying to keep something of the Christ in Christmas and Easter within the New Zealand highly secularized cultural context. We create outreach equipping resources for churches and pastors, pulpit series with small group resources, stuff for youth. So it's just continuous creative communication initiatives with strategy, looking at the church as a whole to identify gaps in the outreaching efforts to try and plug them. So yeah, that's what we do. So yeah, I love it. It's fantastic work, and I look forward to the topic we're talking about.
Awesome, thanks, Dave. And I thought Dave would be the perfect person to talk about youth, reaching youth and young adults with the gospel. Talking about, is there going to be a decline, or is there currently being a decline in Christianity, and what's going on around there? So I think let's just dive into it, Dave. My first question is for youth and young adults, specifically in New Zealand. Is there a decline in Christianity? If so, why is that happening?
Yeah, so I mean that's a 30-minute question. Yeah, I mean youth and young adults, first of all, I'd say are 2 separate demographics, and
Mhm.
I'd look at them quite separately. And if we discuss youth first, and then we discuss young adults. Regarding youth, the primary research I did in New Zealand was traveling, meeting pastors groups nationally, 2015, 2016 with Tony Collis. And we were meeting pastors groups for a number of strategic objectives. However, we had a time for a spare question at the end. And the question we asked was, could someone in the room just tell us, who's been in the city or town for, let's say, 20 or more years, what was happening in youth ministry 25 years ago? How many churches would have a youth ministry? How many youth in total might have been in youth ministry? And then we compared it through to the present period. And we worked out quite consistently, cities and towns right across the country, we would have talked to 1,000 pastors on the topic in that trip. And we actually asked the same question the following year to get more detail on it. That's youth ministry attendance in New Zealand sitting at about 1/3 to 1/4 of what it was 25 years prior. So if you took a town that's in my mind at the moment, mid-90s, about 180 of the 1,000 youth in town would be participating in a youth ministry. They wouldn't all be Christian, but they were favourable, they were present, they were exposed and engaged. You jump on to around about 10, 15 years ago, that was down to about 80, and today that's about 25. And the decline is largely obscured or hidden um, by the fact that many churches no longer have youth ministries, but some churches still put a lot of energy into youth ministry, and they have healthy youth ministries. So I attend a larger church here in Tauranga. We have a very healthy youth ministry. And if you looked at our church, you would instantly think, well, youth ministry is doing fine in Tauranga. What's not seen is that there might be 10 healthy youth ministries across our city where previously there were 25.
Right.
And there's also lesser numbers in many of those. So the decline is very real. And I think that we I think we don't have the level of thought regarding the reasons and the causes to actually bring about a strategic solution at a national level. So that's sort of a challenge. To look at just the decline, and we can come back to reasons at the young adult level. The studies across the last 30 years that I've seen, and I've probably read only 5 or 6 studies, but it's been over a 30-year period, have consistently suggested that at least two-thirds of all young adults connected with our churches leave in the around about age 18 through 22-year-old age bracket. Um, some would say 70%, some would say 80%. Um, I think some of those studies are just goofball studies. I've become quite sick of them because you've got some young academic or person, trying to become notable by studying a really important topic. But the real key in data isn't data, it's knowing how to catalyze actual change. And I think the tragedy here is that in 30 years of having the same information, the churches of New Zealand together have not catalyzed a change to the problem. And I think there are solutions that could be undertaken, but they would require a united view and a national view to identify the problem, to identify the logical needed solution, and to implement it. Simply because the solution isn't something that can be implemented in one place as if that fixed the problem. It's not something to implement in one denomination because that's only going to be one fragment of the church in each place. So yeah, so that decline is very real. And if we look at the energy that we'd spend in outreach and our desire to see more people come to know Christ, um, churches put a lot of effort into their outreach. But the question could be asked, what's the point of all of this outreach if we don't close the back door?
Mm,
If for every two people who come in the front door, we've got two going out the back door, a growth strategy actually is to try and close the back door. And if we then look at what are the primary demographics within which we're losing people, there's two age groups that instantly stand out. Young adults is number one, that 18 through 22-year-old age bracket. I'd say that losing two-thirds is a conservative figure, so it's safe to say it could be 70 or 80% if we actually studied it. Um, the second demographic is the age 12, 13. And that's one that also needs to be talked about, I think, a lot more at a national church level through denominations to each new generation of youth leaders. And it's a new generation about every 18 months. So we need
yeah.
systems that repeatedly bring core messages back to new leaders to enable broader cultural changes that can change the numbers and the demographics and the effectiveness of our outreach. And all of that's achievable if we're ready to engage in that way. So there are integration principles that can be engaged with to try and lessen the attrition of 11, 12, 13 year olds from churches, for example. That answer, it's not like there's one thing and you press a button and it's done.
Mm,
Let's say there's 10 different factors that are involved, but we have control over maybe 7 of those factors. So we're not without power and we could make a choice to do something to change the pattern. And when it comes to young adults, which we could look at the reasons for maybe next if you like, again, I see 3 key areas that are the key factors. There's only one of those I think we can broadly do something about. But I think it would just be sensible of us to do that.
yeah.
To neglect that would be a negligence, given that it's within our power to do something about. And I
Hmm.
would say that the last 30 years we haven't, because we haven't yet come to a point of being ready for coordinated strategies that we do as churches together to actually provide long-term proper solutions to identified problems. So,
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah. And one thing I found really interesting when you were talking about that, Dave, was when you said it's the kind of 12 and 13-year-olds and then the 18 to 22-year-olds. My first thought when I heard that was, those are the ages where you're either kind of starting high school or you're starting university. And
exactly.
so we'll get into reasons soon, but I mean, perhaps is that something do you think which could be tied to it? When obviously these youth and young adults are going through a big change in their life when they go into high school or go into university. And so something to do with that massive change. Often there's big social pressures when they start there. Could have something to do with the decline as well.
100%, 100%. It's the transition period. So,
Yeah,
so if they get integrated into a youth group at age 13, they find some friends. Every probability they'll be there till they're 16 at least.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then depends whether or not their faith is fortified sufficiently to overcome the temptations or the
Mm,
undermining of the faith that's coming through an education system and public media. So they might be there till 18, but then they go off to university. So,
yeah.
so the question
Mm,
then, that I guess leads itself into the next kind of question, which is what's actually going on. So,
Yeah.
um, shall we shall we look at that? The
Let's do it. Yeah, I was going to say that in your experience, what are the main reasons that youth and young adults are leaving? So why don't we start with the maybe the youth and then go to the young adults?
Okay. Firstly, for the church family, young people, something of the authentic spirituality of their parents is going to be a factor. And if they see a faith that's dead and not alive, a faith that's hypocritical with a nice face on Sunday but bad behavior in the home, they can develop a bitterness toward their parents and alongside that, a bitterness toward the faith.
Mm.
So there's a certain attrition that's going to be due to that. Another key factor for attrition in the 11 to 14-year-old age bracket is going to be their inability to find a friend when they go to a youth group. So socially, they don't find someone, and this is where for parents, it sometimes can be painful but necessary to actually look at the idea of changing churches to help their youth or letting their youth go to a different church so they turn up with some friends, because the peer support at that age 11, 12, 13 is really, really significant, and almost more powerful for many of them than their faith in Jesus, because they're only at the beginning of adult thinking. And so the attraction. The next is that a youth ministry, of course, has to be healthy and vibrant. And at the age 11, 12, 13, there's very few of them who will be absolutely committed to go to a youth group because they believe in Jesus and this is the path for life. Most haven't come to that personal level of commitment and conviction yet. And so the attraction factor of the youth ministry is actually important. And if we think that just being spiritual and having no fun is going to work, I think we're deluding ourselves. They need to, at age 12, have someone come and meet them in their tweens group. There needs to be an intermediate age group to point it out. 11 and 12-year-olds are junior youth, are not children. If they're in the Sunday school only, you're going to be losing 11 and 12-year-olds already to point that out.
Yeah.
But assuming we've got a tweens in between 11, 12-year-old program, you need a youth leader to go down and promote what happens and tell them about the camp that's coming up in March, and the awesome program we're going to go have, a Nerf ball war, Nerf, gun war that's coming up. Get them excited about the program, get them excited about turning up with some friends. That gets them through the door. Then you talk about the spiritual. And that's just their age. They're immature.
Yeah.
Um, the other factor, though, is the spiritual, because that's three things that are kind of in the natural. I mean, and to throw it in, the youth leaders' authenticity is the same. And a lot of churches struggle to find youth leaders. You end up with a weak youth ministry. They get lost because there's no youth ministry or no healthy youth ministry.
Mm.
The other is the spiritual dynamic. And this has really changed the last 30 years as well. And we need to get our heads around this, that the reasons for faith is vitally important as a part of the discipleship of our young. That they have found that worldview today in our culture is essentially formed by age 14. Um, and that's super, super young. Most wouldn't ever comprehend the implications of that. That means that at age 11, 12, 13, they are already deciding and concluding for the rest of their life whether they think Christianity is true and real. Now, they are already being given gender ideology and the fact that evolution made everything and there is no God, and you're anti science if you're Christian. That's in the innuendos of education when they're 5, 6, 7, let alone
Mm.
8, 9, 10, through to 11, 12, where their brains begin to mature a little bit and they engage with rational thought for themselves. If we are not giving them, instead of just nice little stories about Jesus from the Bible, whip-de-doo, as sacrilegious as that sounds, we've got to get beyond that to give them a reason for actually believing God exists. And if I give you my children as an example, one of our kids in particular with this, by age 7 or 8, he was questioning the existence of God. And so I remember getting a plastic bag and putting his Lego blocks in it and telling him to shake it. And the simple illustration is, are those Lego blocks going to make anything by themselves?
Yeah.
How long do you have to keep shaking it to create something amazing? And then you show them something amazing like the kinesin, which are these robots with 2 legs and 2 arms walking inside the cells of our bodies. Just something mind-blowing. Get a book, get them to randomly type, or get a cat to walk across a keyboard and type things. Are you going to type words? Are you going to write a book? Show them the DNA. It is logically irrational to assume that you've got design without a designer. Intelligent
Mm.
information needs an author. There's a God. So,
Yeah.
so, and to give you the next one, we came through to a point where we're sitting at the dinner table one day, and he says, "I don't think I believe in miracles," and I completely see the reasons why. I mean,
Yeah.
how many people have most of us seen walk who couldn't walk? I have actually seen one, but I was in Indonesia at the time. And in our country, that doesn't seem to happen very often. So I thought, okay, after dinner, everyone to the lounge. I'll show you a video. And I own a DVD, one of those old fashioned things called Seven Miracles in a Martyr. And it's where
Yeah.
Reinhard Bonnke, the great evangelist of Africa, he's an amazing, remarkable man, passed away a few years ago, created a documentary that showed one blind person seeing, one deaf person hearing, one mute person speaking, a lame person walking, a woman sort of in a wheelchair, literally standing up and running, a dead person raised, and a documentary on, with the evidences of these miracles. At the end of it, you can't deny miracles happen, in which case you
Mm.
talk with your 10 or 11-year-old about, well, okay, why aren't we seeing miracles here? Why doesn't God heal every person? By the way, if God did heal every person, shouldn't we have people around who are 2,000 years old, right? In other words,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
so God is letting suffering and evil play itself out. This life isn't forever. There's a heaven, etc.
Yeah.
But by answering those questions, that fortified the faith probably by the age of 10. And my point is, the questions were being asked. If, and
Yeah.
my kids, to be honest, when they were 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Mm.
And then it's a case of reiterating some of that at 11, 12, and then they know why it might be rationally true. And so I think our discipleship is significantly failing to understand the scope and reach of the skepticism of our society that's undermining faith in the young to lead to a confirmed worldview by age 14, even if they still attend youth group. They've already
Yeah.
concluded it's fundamentally untrue.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And I know in my own life, it was only probably about 9 or 10 years ago when I was in that age group where I can thoroughly remember having conversations with my friends in primary school while I was kind of year 6, 7, 8, having conversations about Jesus. I was trying to argue for the existence of God, and my friends would be having these questions. And so, absolutely, I was asking the questions. Now, I had the privilege and I had the blessing of having a dad as a pastor, so I could go home and dad had a lot of answers to the questions that I had, and so I could ask him. In this day and age, we have YouTube and the internet, which is great when we have these questions. And so if it hadn't been for having the answers to my questions and the
Mm,
questions that my friends were raising to me, then I can completely see how I could have slipped away. And so, yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Dave, that we do need to be getting this, the apologetics, the answers to the questions that kids have at an early age. So, yeah, that's really good to know.
mm. Young adults?
Yeah, let's move on to young
Yeah.
adults. Sounds good.
Yeah, because 30 minutes will disappear, with thereabouts in no time on these topics. I mean, the young adults thing is quite complex and quite involved. There's multiple factors,
Mm,
but when I look at, I mean, I've been a pastor. Just to note it, I had 9 years as a pastor in a larger church in Singapore, and I've had direct hands-on engagement in leadership and innovation, and as a pastor, as a youth leader, and in interchurch work and so on. Um, before the current work, which I started 12 years ago, um, we would lose most young adults, and we were only getting a percentage of the 11, 12-year-olds in the church I was in when I started, and we managed to get to a point of keeping nearly all of them. And so there were quite a few lessons within that. When I look at why young adults leave Christianity, I see three fundamental factors that sit behind the myriads of pages that can be written about it.
hmm
But then there's a natural factor as well. If you want, can you make a note to ask me the natural factor? The
Right.
um, the 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 key factors that I see is, first of all, for the three, to state the three things, it's a lack of experience, a lack of reasons, and a lack of support. So on the first one, a lack of experience, if the discipleship lacks an authenticity of faith and an excitement that gets them to engage with the Bible and to seek to try and hear God's voice through the Word of God, to the point where they have a few experiences of actually thinking, I think God might have actually spoken to my heart about something,
Yeah.
and they get excited. And as part of their discipleship, they have to pray for people, and maybe even to think through, what might God say to this person? Some would call that a prophetic word. In a conservative tradition, you're just speaking truth. Might God say to that person, right?
Yeah.
Conservative Pentecostal makes very little difference. Speak blessing. I think God led me in that prayer. If they're not having authentic experience of the faith, they have nothing to convince them the faith is fundamentally true. The second thing is, if they don't know the reasons for faith. They will have no way to defend that faith in the face of what they're going to be barraged with
Yeah.
at the 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old, let alone a university and in the adult world. We live in the third most secularized culture in the world, according to a recent international study, a secular study of religions globally. Um, so we face some pretty unique dynamics here in New Zealand related to spiritual things. So you've got the secularizing, the atheisticizing of everything in the public square, and you've got this. So there's a why would they believe Christianity to be fundamentally true in the face of all the evidence that seems to say otherwise? There's the peer pressure and the social ostracizing if you choose to follow Christianity, including the mockery from the lecturer at the university who
Mm.
makes sport out of undermining the faith of the young person. And this literally happens, which is prejudicial and wrong, but it's
Yeah.
currently celebrated in our culture. But you've then got, for a third factor on reasons, the very difficult or awkward public perception that's being developed that Christian morality is in itself prejudicial.
Yeah.
So that's not just classic apologetics, that's cultural apologetics. Those are
Yeah.
very difficult issues. So if our young people as youth aren't being educated, they're ready to be annihilated by the time they're young adults. The third one is going to be because of course they've got the temptations of the world too. You have to believe, I mean, pornography is everywhere. You go to a university and there's all the sexual promiscuity going on, and they have to believe their faith is fundamentally true and have an authentic enough connection with God to have the moral fortitude to choose to live God's way rather than man's way. And the third factor is, of course, support. And in particular, from rural communities or people who change cities for tertiary education or a job experience or apprenticeship, they are now separated from their support structure. So they might have maintained a certain type of behavior through their teenage years because the peer group culture was that. They now find themselves in a completely different environment. If they don't have that fortitude, moral fortitude within themselves to sustain it, they are going to fall over, in which case you need to rally support around them. So Christian parents, I think, have an obligation to give a lot of energy to helping their Christian young people get connected to Christian community and support if they move cities, because they're not ready often to deal with the nature and power of the that cultural force and pressure.
Yeah.
But I think churches do need to think through and have a responsibility before God. It's a heavy thing to say, to, to be the spiritual parents of people who've come to faith whose families aren't church going or Christian families.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a big difference there. Um, in which case, if 5 people from my youth group, go off to university in another city from non-church families, who else will look after them if not me? So a local church needs to take a serving role and to reserve some resource to be in touch with and to support and to travel and to visit. And I remember doing this in New Zealand. I traveled and visited past youth at universities and other things and encouraging them. If you've got a church yet, and get them plugged in that first month. Go take a week off your own church, go travel, go to church with them, introduce them to people, so
Yeah.
the support structures can come in place. So I think those are the three key factors, and any other factor that's given springs out of it. The natural factor, to note it, because I remembered by myself, would be that I think that young adult ministry and the dynamics of it have changed compared to 20, 30 years ago. Um, if I'm a 12-year-old coming into a youth ministry, it's exciting because you've got camps where the 12-year-old
Yeah.
ministry didn't have. You've got programs, you've got the Nerf war I mentioned, and the paint war, and the whatever else going on. I mean, this is exciting. I want to be a part of this. And then there's those cool teenagers that I look up to, and man, that 15-year-old is so grown up, and I look forward to being like him when I'm grown up. He's just a cool dude. I want to be with him. So there's an attraction factor. It is a graduation. That is a step upward to go from the in-betweens group or the Sunday school to go into the youth group. The problem is in most of our churches, it's not a step up, it never has been, to go from youth to young adults. And that wasn't a problem when your youth were becoming adults. I was on my own, kicked out of a home by the time I was just at the end of just turning 18. I've
Yeah.
been on my own. I mentally became an adult looking after myself when I was about 14 because of the extent of rejection and a family sense of rejection and whatever else that I felt. And I had to choose who I was going to be. And I've got friends who are out in the workforce and they've got cars. You know, you could get your driver's license at 15 back in the day. You were forced to be an adult. Today, you
Hmm.
can't buy a home because they cost so much. You live with your parents till you're 28. You don't do your own washing. You hardly vacuum your floor of your bedroom. There's a psychological difference. In one study I saw recently, a bunch of 30-year-olds are asked, would you say you're an adult yet? And about half of them are saying, I don't think I'm even an adult yet. They didn't want to identify as an adult. They still saw
Yeah.
themselves as a young adult and a youth. So
Oh, fascinating.
psychologically, they aren't going to be attracted to the young adults ministry by nature of their faith. You know how I said earlier that the 12-year-old coming in, we're naive to think we don't need the programs to attract them because they don't have a depth of faith and spiritual hunger yet to come to the youth ministry because it's true. And tragically, for half or three-quarters of our 17 and 18-year-olds, they don't yet have a mature, grounded faith. So the young adults ministry today has to be an attraction model, because I hate to say it, because we're not here as entertainers. But I tell you, entertainment and comedy is the best form of communication. And
Right.
sometimes you've got to be realistic. But they don't need the Nerf war. They don't need the paint war. You know, they need the road trip where they disappear in their cars for 3 days and go off to some
Yeah.
place. You know,
Hmm.
take them yachting. They'd never have done that before. They need life experiences that are exciting to them at their age to actually explore the world some more. Go on a 2-day tramping trip, you know, not too long, help everybody succeed on it. Light a big bonfire somewhere. That's young adult kind of adventure. So it
Yeah.
needs to be an attraction model that then also has the substance and it has to be done without any naivety to underestimate the force of the cultural pressure against our faith. Third most secularized nation in the world, our government, our media, our entire education system is all complicit in a religious worldview that is being pushed at every single level of society and in the social pressure of a workplace where you can be considered prejudicial and a bigot simply for saying that you are a Christian.
Yeah.
Um, we need to be discussing the real issues with them to fortify them.
Yeah. I love that point you make about how the young adults will still need a attraction factor. And I think in my experience through growing up, going through youth group and young adult, obviously I'm still a young adult now, but you know, I think a mistake that we can make so much is if we go too far one way. In other words,
Yeah.
we will focus too much on the entertainment and then we have no uh, spiritual aspect of it. And what will happen, or at least what I noticed happened in our youth group, is the entertainment was good when we were in kind of, 13, 14, 15-year olds. But once we got to about 16 and people
Yeah,
got
with
their driver's license and the parties started, well, all of a sudden it's a Saturday night. They've got the choice between going to a party and getting drunk or going to the youth group and doing some other maybe entertaining thing. The obvious choice for a lot of them was I'll choose whatever one's going to make me have the best
yeah,
time, and in most cases it was the party. And on the other hand, you've got the youth groups who maybe focus, as you say, too much on the spiritual, and it doesn't have that attraction factor. So I think the challenge for youth groups and young adult ministries as well is finding the balance between the spiritual side and the attraction, and knowing that at the forefront of our mind, our focus is to be making disciples, right? And so if
absolutely.
that means that we have to, you know, change the way we do it and add a bit more entertainment or add a bit more spirituality to it, then that's what we need to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you brought to the table there is a really important balancing point to what I said. No conversation ever covers everything, and yeah,
Mm,
really important. Yeah, I've found that young people are looking for authenticity. The problem is that the authentic spiritual reality is often less a driver than their desire for friends. And
yeah,
that's where the social dynamic is needed to get them through the door. But if we aren't taking that straight through to authentic spirituality, if we aren't turning up as youth leaders and as leaders, there is a God. I mean, that's just baseline. And you're
yeah,
living in a world where you're told there is no God. So today we're going to look at prayer, and we're going to look at the fact that prayer actually changes things. This isn't theory. We don't need to talk about the Bible for ages on this. It's really, really simple. Ask and you will receive. You know,
yeah,
and so just authentic spirituality that takes it to practical action and results. It's got to be passionate. Yeah. I'd
yeah.
say experiences of the Holy Spirit are really important.
Mm,
Really important. I grew up in a conservative church environment where I would say something of the outward working of the Spirit was just literally shut out of that equation, almost kind of reformed in some ways. We went to these Easter camps where the Holy Spirit just let loose. What God did in those camps was mind blowing, transformed my view of God,
Yeah.
imprinted something into my heart. So, and this is where, I mean, I also think, I mean, if people want mentors, I mean, Rick Warren is a great mentor for church leadership. Some will argue with him on points of theology. Get over ourselves. No one's right on everything. But he talks about the concentric circles of church growth. And are you familiar with this sort of little analogy? Or
No.
Nick? Yeah. So what you've got these circles, and so you've got the core. I've got to remember them. Okay, no, I'll go from the outside. You've got the community, the crowd, the congregation, the committed, and the core.
Yeah.
So the community is everyone who could potentially be a part of your group. For our church, Otamotai Peninsula, 20,000 people, right? Then you've got, and youth group would be the same, a local high school, 1,000
Hmm.
students. So you've got community, you've got crowd, the crowd of those who have attended at some point who are connected to you. So for our church, probably 800 to 1,000 people. You've then got the congregation, those who turn up on an average Sunday for us, about 400. You've then got the committed, which you could measure in a couple of different ways. That could be those in small groups, or you could measure that as those who are doing daily devotions and reading the Bible, right? Because if you're in a youth group of
Yeah.
20 people, you might not need a small group separate. Are they reading their
Mm.
Bible? And the core is those who have begun to own those values so much so that they're now beginning to help that happen for others.
Yeah.
And the point is that if you want to have growth, and to see people coming to faith, you need to have a balanced circle at every single stage. So, I mean, if you want to do great outreach, but you live in the middle of nowhere in the countryside, there's 15 youth at your youth group and only 18 youth in the school. You can't grow much, can you?
Yeah.
When it comes to the crowd, this is where in Singapore, with a group I took on, um, an average outreach had hardly anybody turn up. They had no crowd.
Yeah.
You had the congregation, and the next circle was only 10 or 15 people bigger. So we changed that to
Mm.
make the next circle hundreds of people by learning how to do great outreach programs and connection programs to build the bridges. The congregation is then just the people who turn up, but it's your discipleship is to push people to the center, and that the center is where the leaders come from for this. But the goal is people who are reading their Bibles, who are committed to fellowship, who know what their mission is and how to engage within their world that you're discipling. So, um, yeah, so the youth leader needs to have that understanding, and that's outreach strategy. If you think it's one thing, you'll fail. Evangelistic churches don't grow. Evangelistic youth ministries don't grow. Healthy churches grow. Healthy youth ministries grow. And health will involve the attraction programs, but it will involve solid content from a passionate heart. And then you need the small group. When you get to
Yeah.
15 and 16, you need the guys group and the girls group, or the combined
Hmm.
that's looking at discipleship, looking at the more solid topic than the Friday night or Sunday afternoon youth group does, because
Yeah.
you're actually ready for some meat. And as a youth leader and as a pastor of a church, you are failing in the discipleship of your young if they don't not only know things about prayer or about the gospel and conversation or an understanding of culture, but they have to understand exegesis. They do have to understand a book study. They have to have
Hmm.
done a book study, even if it's simple, of an Old Testament book and a Pauline letter and one of the Gospels, because they have to learn to revere the Word of God and to understand the Word of God within its context. And that needs to be taught by someone who's not just a teacher with knowledge, but who's actually genuinely enthused, because it's out of the overflow of the heart that the mouth speaks. In
Yeah.
discipleship, we reproduce after our kind. It's 1 Corinthians 11:1. Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. So so many things in discipleship are more caught than taught. So that authentic spirituality coming not only to the message sort of side, but then to the Bible study and the exegesis and teaching them to understand context and time to translate messages into our culture and so on. It's got to come from a genuine excitement about these topics. We've got to be spiritually alive to create spiritual life. And I think
Yeah.
that's where just true discipleship begins to really take place.
Absolutely. Amen. I agree. I agree so much. I think, yeah, if every youth leader in New Zealand heard this, Dave, and started doing these things, I think we would see change. So if you're a youth leader and you're listening to this, I think, yeah, really think about these things which Dave has said. And one thing I love, which you've talked about quite a bit already, is how we need to be, again, going back to the whole thing about, balancing, doing both, is the providing people a space in which they can have this authentic spiritual experience. You're talking about the Holy Spirit at the Easter camp that you went to, and I think that's absolutely crucial, as well as the intellectual side of things, where we can actually get facts and reason and logic. Because, as you say, once people go into even high school, I mean, I was saying before, in primary school, I was having these conversations with people
Yeah,
who
you're right.
were questioning Christianity. So,
So
we need to be. We can't wait until you're in your 20s or 30s to start getting apologetics. It has to be happening really as early as we can. And I remember we at our church we were doing a few kids ministries for I think it was about 5 to 11-year-olds, and it's really simple. I mean, often we think, oh, how are we going to talk about the cosmological argument with a 5-year-old, right? And I love what you did with your kids with the Lego, right? It's a simple illustration. You just showed them, look, random processes don't lead to intelligent information. In the same way, I mean, I love the example. I learned this one off Ray Comfort, who many who are listening may know, but he talks about, when we look at a building, we don't know the builder of the building, but the building is proof of the building, right?
yeah,
And
that's
so you
right.
can ask a kid, like, look at that building over there. How do you know that there was a building? And they'll say, oh, well, it just exists. There has to have been a builder. And so, in the same way, we can do this with creation. So there's so many we can simplify both spiritual truths and maybe scientific truths about God. We can simplify them and present them to kids in a way in which they will understand. And maybe they learnt that truth about a building equals a builder when they were 7 years old, but maybe once they get to 12 or 13 and they've learned a lot more in school and they're more able to understand information, then we can give them the cosmological argument. And then maybe in the young adult years, when they're going to university, they've gone and studied science at maybe at uni or at high school, then you can really get into kind of just following them where they're at
That's
and
right.
continue to provide these truths. But we can't wait until it's too late to present it. So
It's
I love
that's right.
what you've said about that.
Preemptive, yeah. It's
Yeah.
preemptive. You're not
Yeah.
reacting to a problem, you've got to preempt the fact that the problem is coming.
Yeah.
And I think with the young adults, that's what we've failed to do. And we've had the problem defined too many times now, and we've had the data too many times. It's just negligence to not actually act where we have the power to act.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Dave. Well, just to finish off then, my third, I guess the final thing I wanted to talk about, maybe briefly just say, what can we be doing if for the listeners who are listening to the podcast right now, or if they're watching it on YouTube, what can we be doing? So maybe one bit of advice for like the older Christian who maybe has kids who are going through this stage, and maybe for the younger Christian, the one who's currently going through youth and young adulthood, what bits of advice would you give them?
For parents, you've got to take responsibility for the discipleship of your own children. For parents, this is a very big statement. You've got to take responsibility for the education of your own children. You can't trust the
Yeah,
school to do it anymore. It used to be about reading, writing, and math. It's now about an ideological education that leverages reading, writing, and math and is achieving poor outcomes, statistically well demonstrated on the reading,
yeah,
writing, and math. So um, you don't second the education of your children, and certainly not of their spiritual and religious worldview and so on, to a public education system. You have to be engaged, you have to preempt problems, and you have to be spending time with your kids discussing these things. And many who aren't in the habit of doing that, it might be hard, but talk with others in your church about how you might do it. But for youth, seek out answers because they exist. That's quite
hmm,
simple. Um, for pastors, you are responsible for the discipleship of the youth who come to your church. You cannot second, that means give away that responsibility to a youth leader. And I don't mean this patronizingly, but the average youth leader is lasting 18 months to 2 years, at very best
yeah,
4 years. I would say until you've been in ministry leading a single group for 5 years, you don't even understand how discipleship happens. At that point, you might be ready to understand educational theory and spiral curriculum to actually deliver measurable, sustainable results. So most discipleship is completely random. And your average youth leader, I think, leaves youth ministry after 18 months to 2 years and still probably couldn't answer in clear form what is the mission of the church.
mm,
I have tested that and I have been horrified because There are pastors who struggle to answer that directly as well, which is not many, but it does happen. So um, the pastor is responsible for the culture and the environment of the local church. And they cannot shirk that responsibility and go, oh, there's too much on me. No, prioritize. Your job is to lead the church in its mission. If I'm the owner of a business, which I am, my job is to lead that business to achieve its mission, which in my case isn't to make money, which in most businesses it would be. We've got an educational objective. And that's what we measure our success against. When you get a new youth leader, you therefore need to put some things in place to make sure they know what the mission of the church is and how to serve that for the very brief time they will be there. Because in a 10-year
Mm.
period, you're going to have at least 5 youth leaders. So it is the pastor's responsibility to create the culture. When you've handed the reins over in this trust, you accept there's going to be many imperfections, but you thank God for your youth leader and you pray for them. But you give the guideline. If I can give then 2 resources for the youth leader and the pastor that we're behind, we look at outreach with a unity and national view. So it's quite a unique area of speciality. And we therefore look at what a denomination can do. So I would say, firstly, connect to everything your denomination offers. But you're then going to discover some gaps, and I want to offer 2 things in the gaps. The first thing is called godtalk.nz, and it's a vision and it's a resource. If you go there, each new youth leader, I suggest, should be made by their pastor. I genuinely believe this. To go godtalk.nz, click on the leadership videos, 12 5-minute videos. This will teach them leadership theory about the mission of the church, building outreach and culture, outreaching events, how to help young people learn how to have conversations with their friends, school groups, and that kind of stuff. And it's 1 hour of training in total. So you make them do it, and then you bring them back and you say to the new youth leader, every year you've got to give a month to equipping for conversational outreach to help your youth articulate and stand up for their faith. Agreed? Yes, good. As a pastor, I'll do that as well. I'll model it to you. It's an expectation. Good. You will achieve far more than most youth groups ever do simply by being that catalyst. That website then also has a page called Equipping, and that has 15 5-minute conversational outreach equipping videos, and every one of them has a discussion guide with it for the youth leader. So the youth leader can take the leadership videos, get 4 leaders, show them a 5-minute video, have a 10-minute discussion. They can then get the equipping videos, show a 5-minute video to your whole group of 20 youth or whatever you've got. And there's your discussion guide to do 4 or 5 weeks in a row, looking at conversational outreach skills. What's our mission? How do we engage in our school? So that actually helps that dynamic to happen repeatably. And that needs promoting to every new youth leader on average every 1.5 to 2 years in every single church, so that outreach gets restored. And across the top for the youth leader, there's 4 circles. That gives you 4 other things that the denominations will never get happening. And actually, well, 3 other things. And that's worth noticing. One of those is unity amongst youth ministries in a community. So youth leaders support each other within their city. Another one is combined youth events, and the other would relate to schools. But the other resource I want to promote is brand new, and the draft website went live yesterday. But I'm hoping this is going to be utilised in every church in New Zealand with young adults, which is a big goal. Whychristiansbelieve.nz. So I've spent 12 years creating a resource. The challenge was to create something that was robust in its content, but simple enough for youth to engage with. And so what it is, it's a 7-part series for a discussion group. And it's called Why Christians Believe Christianity to be True, because the content from God through to Jesus through to today is why Christians actually believe Christianity to be true. And so the 7 parts each have a 15-minute video with a discussion guide and a booklet. Available as a PDF, but there's a purchase option. And if you place orders, in fact, if you donate to your church to purchase them, it could be $15 per series, set of 7 booklets as a gift for each youth and young adult. But because it's a donation, you get your donation receipt at the end of the year. It makes it $10.
Oh, true.
The resource would be worth $30 or more. You can't buy a book for $25. This isn't a book. This is design colored 7 booklets in a box that go with the videos, and the discussion guides free online. And this could help a more holistic thinking through of, why do we believe in a God? Why do we believe God's revealed himself through history? Why do we trust the Bible? Why is that even important? Oh, God claims to be good. You'd never think that unless God explained it, right? Okay, anything else as to why we trust the Bible? Is there any evidence that there's a divine hand? It's a logical progression from beginning to end to explain why we think this faith is true. Most will never hear that thought process explained in their life. Most adults, when they see this series, will never have actually considered the rationality of those things lined up together. So that's it's all free online, including PDFs. whychristiansbelieve.nz. But I am hoping that in the span of the next 4 months, every church leader will look at it and consider making a purchase through their church. Someone can donate. It's as a gift for your youth and young adults to help fortify their faith. There's a box of 7 booklets to sit on a bookshelf. Everything else is digital. They don't look at it when the professor disses their faith. But if something they've studied on the bookshelf might have a retained value to engage, and certainly the discussions with the material. The youth will suit videos, discussion guides. The booklets is more 16 years up. But those, so godtalk.nz and whychristiansbelieve.nz, free resources, easy to use.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dave. That's awesome that you've given us those resources as well as this awesome conversation. So thank you for your time. I'm sure all of our listeners greatly appreciate what you have brought to the table today. So thank you everyone for listening. I hope that you really took away some valuable content from today. We'll see you on the next episode of The Garrison.